Okay, so I'm going to take another crack at your argument, and I want to do two things in this series of videos. It's probably going to end up being two videos. Those of you watching, do me a favor, and if you are actually interested in this exchange and want to weigh in on whether my views have merit or Eightfootmanchild's views have merit, please watch both parts to this video. It does you no good to watch part 1 and not part 2, especially since I do save some of my better arguments for the end. Your argument from my perspective goes as follows. You have determined that the theistic belief is inherently flawed in that it cannot do much more than present secondary characteristics to describe what you essentially call nothing. Since in many cases you hear us equivocating God to something that is immaterial. I assume that you believe that this argument is fairly airtight, such that any apologist that challenges it, like myself, will most likely not pass through your first premise and even get to play part 2 of your game. However, I'm assuming because there's a part 2 to your game that you think it's possible someone could break through and give you what you're asking for. So part 2, it's kind of your safety net, is that should any brilliant mind satisfy your requests governed by the very parameters you set forth, here is your safety net, which is, should I give you a physical ontology, you then will move into comments like the one you wrote on your last video, and I'll read that. You say, God is either physical, in which case he is subject to the same scrutiny as any other physical phenomena, and you cannot make claims about the supposed intangibility of the magisteria he occupies, or he's aphysical, in which case you must provide both a positive ontology for the word and a mechanism by which it may interact with the physical. You conclude by saying you cannot have it both ways. Actually, this is where I believe you to be exposing a fallacy. You fully admitted to me before that you don't expect the finite, in other words, man, to fully comprehend or describe the infinite, which I claim to be God. Yet here you reveal that not only do you expect such things, but you also limit the infinite being in question by telling me that he cannot be both physical and non-physical. Granted, you found my fish tank analogy to be lacking, but let me revisit that setup again and reiterate a point I was originally trying to make in order to suggest how things are exactly possible. In the fish tank scenario, I let you see how my theistic fish interacted with the pet owner. And while the pet owner manifested itself as a fishnet or food flakes or even a submerged hand, the pet owner was interacting in the physical space that that fish occupied. All the while, his full exposure and body were standing outside of that space, still able to observe everything, still able to have that omnipresence, but physically involved by dipping the hand in and manifesting himself, at least in part, to those fish. So it's just kind of irony here that you are limiting what I call an all-powerful entity by saying he has to be one or the other, he can't be both. By what mechanisms are you allowing yourself to be informed by making such a claim? Furthermore, what logical sense does it make to assume an entity that created all the natural laws and physical properties that we observe would also be bound by them? Would not the creator of such things be able to manipulate and even break such boundaries? Belief in anything lesser, to me, would be not believing in the Christian described all-powerful God. Jumping into some responses that you are challenging me with in your video, you start off by talking about supposing a secondary characteristic of anything taller than me, and you use that to paint a picture that would show me the fallacy in only describing something as taller than you, because obviously lots of things meet that criteria. I don't really have a whole lot of arguments against this because I understand what you're getting at. My only question back to you on this point is, wouldn't enough secondary characteristics eventually get us to a point of specificity that you desire? I think of an analogy of a sketch artist asking a victim to describe the perpetrator of a crime. At some point, the secondary traits being described become specific enough for the artist to actually draw an image of said person, and in most cases, or many cases, with deadly accuracy. So I'm kind of making the argument back at you that if I give you enough secondary characteristics, you should be able to draw some sort of parallel to what I'm describing, and I'm giving you that as an example. You then go on to talk about a positive ontology, and you view all of the ontologies that we present as a negative one. And you say that you know what he is not, you don't know what he is. I challenged you in your comment section with a comment about love. I asked you what love was, and you said it's matter. Same with all emotions. They are emergent properties of the physical activities and functions of the brain. I'm not going to hang my hat on the love argument, though I would love to actually argue this with you maybe in a future video exchange. So for now, I'm going to grant you this assertion, but I find you to be on shaky ground here. While your description of love is certainly not going to sell any Hallmark cards, it is feasible to give you some leeway here. Were I to argue and go down that rabbit trail, I might assert that the physical activities and functions of the brain are only the body's reaction to love, not love itself. Okay, so let me go into your next point. I talked about the odds of life and kind of said you don't want to go there, and then I maybe callously said I digress, and that seemed to anger you a little bit, and I apologize. I was not meant to do that. You went on to claim that this is a fallacy on my part, that I need to do my research and study it because you're tired of hearing this argument, etc., etc. But let me get into it a little bit. You seem to claim that it was a fallacy because it does not inherently mean that God did it just because we cannot assign life to be just random chance. Well, with that statement, you're implying to me that other options are available. I just don't see that. Everything is either randomly emerged or it was purposely created. Now, you might have an argument that this does not necessarily prove that my Christian creator is the only option, and I would agree with you there. But unless there's a third choice I'm unaware of, you will need to help me out in understanding the fallacy here. Just calling it a fallacy doesn't help me, and I'm not quite at your intellectual level to understand what your point was there. Furthermore, I have a little bit of research here. I want to read you from Mark Eastman, who's an MD, and he has a book published called Creation by Design. The following is a quote from him. In the last 30 years, a number of prominent scientists have attempted to calculate the odds that a free-living, single-celled organism, such as a bacterium, might result by chance combining the pre-existent building blocks. Harold Morowitz calculated the odds as 1 chance in 10 to the 100 billionth power. Sir Fred Hoyle calculated the odds of only the proteins of an amoeba arising by chance as 1 chance in 10 to the 40,000th power. The odds calculated by Morowitz and Hoyle are staggering. The odds led Fred Hoyle to state that the probability of spontaneous generation is about the same as the probability of a tornado sweeping through a junkyard and assembling a Boeing 747 from the contents therein. Mathematicians tell us that any event with an improbably greater than 1 chance in 10 to the 50th power is in the realm of metaphysics, i.e. a miracle. I read that last sentence basically to show that there is random chance odds limitations. Anything greater than chance in 10 to the 50th power. So anything less than that you could argue is random chance. But since the odds presented above are both 1 in 10 to the 40,000th power and 1 in 10 to the 100 billionth power, I think that's well beyond 1 in 10 to the 50th power.